Welcome to the Movie Zone. Today, we are recapping the 2017 drama movie, Taxi Driver, a historical action drama about a taxi driver stuck amidst a revolution. This one's a true story. Let's begin. The story begins in the 80s in South Korea, in the streets of Seoul. A taxi driver, Kim Sa-book, rides around looking for a customer. On his way, he comes across a protest going on in the streets against the South Korean government who had enacted martial law in the country. He curses the protesters as he knows that no country is perfect. Kim had bought his car with the money he earned in Saudi when he worked there. He feels that Saudi is much worse than here, and yet the people do not protest there. With the protest going on, Kim takes a narrower street to get to his destination. When on his way, his services are taken up by a couple who are pregnant. The lady's water had broken, so they needed to rush to the hospital. Despite the whole main street covered with protesters, Kim manages to take the couple to the hospital in time. The man, however, had forgotten his purse, so he couldn't pay Kim. Kim is pretty bummed, but lets the couple go, after the man promises to pay him the next day. It's pretty evident that Kim is a nice man, who cares about the people around him. The middle-aged guy then returns back to his home. His wife passed away several years ago, and he lives alone with his daughter. When he gets home, he notices that his daughter is hurt and quickly concludes that it's the work of his landlord's son, Sang-go. Furious, Kim goes to scold the child, but he is faced with a different situation than he expected. The landlady scolds him and his daughter instead for hurting his child. She tells him that his daughter is very rough when playing and he could discipline her. She also tells him that his rent due is now up to 100,000 won, and she can't hold on to that much debt from him. Kim promises to talk to his daughter and goes back without complaining. The next day, Kim takes his taxi for repairs. He underpays the mechanic who tells him about the several issues with the old taxi, especially with the old engine which may give up soon. Kim says that he doesn't want to do the repairs yet. It's hard for Kim to manage the little resources that he has for his rent, car, and daughter's fees. Life isn't as he expected it to be. Across the ocean in Japan, 4 journalists get together in a restaurant discussing the issues in the world. David John from BBC tells Jürgen Hindspeter, or Peter, of the ARD/NDR Germany, that South Korea had extended the martial law and the tensions were rising in the country. Peter finds it to be very intriguing and wants to cover the news. The very next day, Peter heads to South Korea under the alliance of a missionary, as no reporters were allowed to enter the country. He meets up with one of the local reporters in a cafe. The reporter tells him about the situation, which is getting worse by the day. All the opposing leaders had been captured. He hands a diary to Peter, which relays the rules for reporters. One issue is highlighted: never mention Gwangju. Gwangju province had been shut off from the mainland and no news of the place was seen for several days now. Even the entire local newspaper of Gwangju had been censored to prevent any news from leaking. Peter decides to go there in order to record the news from there. He asks the man to get him a taxi to Gwangju. Back at a restaurant of the drivers' union, Kim hears one of the drivers talking about how someone was going to pay him 100,000 won for a trip to Gwangju. The customer is a foreigner who is paying big money. Kim overhears this and quickly rushes to the place to pick up the customer. Before the driver could reach there, he uses the little knowledge he has in English to convince them that he was the driver they hired. On his way, Kim can't help but laugh at how he is making such easy money. The trip would take him 5 hours at most, and 100,000 won for that much was a lot of money. When they reach the outskirts of Gwangju, Kim realizes that it has been barricaded by the soldiers. Regardless, he maneuvers his way past the barricades, only to be stopped by a large group of soldiers. Kim takes the taxi back after being intimidated by the force. He stops the taxi at a fair distance away and tells Peter that he cannot take him to Gwangju because the soldiers won't allow him. Peter lets him know that if he doesn't get to Gwangju, Kim will not receive his money. Frustrated, Kim takes a roundabout and asks one of the local if there is another way to Gwangju. The old man tells him about a way through the hills, but when they go there, it too is swarmed with soldiers. This time, Kim lies to them, telling them that Peter is a businessman who needs to get his papers soon. Even Peter adds to this ruse and pretends that his boss would be angry if he didn't get the papers. The soldiers let them through. On the way, Kim asks for the money with Peter and threatens that he will go back if he doesn't give it now. Peter hands him half the money and promises the rest after the job is done. They soon reach the streets of Gwangju, which is completely empty even in daytime. There are several posters and pamphlets hung on the streets, protesting against the government's tyranny. Just then, they come across a truck full of students heading to the local hospital. Peter gets off the taxi to interview the students. One of the students, Jae-sik, who is good at English, tells Peter about them. Peter then decides to follow and record the journey. He wants to interview one of the students named Young Pyo. He gets on their truck and asks Kim to follow. While on his way, he takes a U-turn instead and heads to roam the city. He just wishes to look around, but he has no choice but to help an old woman who wishes to go to the hospital to meet her young son. Kim drives her to the hospital and finds that it is filled with injured and dead people, with more people coming in every minute. They go inside, and it turns out that the woman's son is actually Young Pyo. He arrives along with his friends who had been searching for Kim. Apparently, Peter had left one of his expensive cameras in his taxi. They all accuse Kim of trying to steal Peter's equipment. Kim denies the accusations, but the camera is found in his taxi. Peter hands him the rest of the money and asks him to go away. But the locals don't let Peter pay. They threaten Kim that they will complain about his misconduct. In order to save his license and reputation as a driver, he gives away the money that Peter had paid to him earlier, promising to help them until the work is done. Kim drives Peter and Jae-sik around the city, and Jae-sik directs them to the main protest happening in the city. A large number of people have gathered to protest against martial law. Men and women of all ages have gathered who cheer Peter and Kim for their work to their cause. All of them then keep the taxi outside a building and go to the rooftop to meet a local reporter, Choi, who has been clicking pictures of the rally below. Choi warns him of the risk that he has put himself into and thanks him for the work he is doing for the Korean people. They both start clicking pictures of the rally below, while Kim sits down and has his lunch. Soon, the rally below is attacked by the military. They want to disperse and destroy the rally's morale. Choi, Peter, and Jae-sik rush to the streets, and Kim reluctantly follows. They reach the tear gas-filled streets and see the atrocities being committed by the army. Kim gets scared and tries to pull Peter away to a safer location, but he doesn't want to go. Peter even accidentally drops his camera in the process. Soon the rally becomes a riot. The army is forced to use brutal force. The plaincloth policemen notice the reporter amidst the crowd, but are unable to get to him soon enough. Kim, Jae-sik, and Peter get back in the taxi. It takes some time to start, but they manage to escape before being captured. They go straight to drop off Jae-sik, but Kim's taxi breaks down right outside his house. The other taxi drivers arrive, and Ryu decides to help them. He tows Kim's taxi to a repair shop and lends him parts from his own taxi so that they can make their way out the next day. Kim doesn't want to stay the night because his daughter is all alone. He gets frustrated. Peter, who doesn't understand the situation, tries to hand him some money, hoping it would make him feel better, but the driver gets angry. They get into a scuffle, making the whole mood sour. Later, the whole group heads to Ryu's house, hoping to forget the bad memories they just made. They all have dinner together and have fun, even if it lasts for a short while. Soon, they are all called to the TV station, which has been shut down and burned by the army. While Peter records the whole scene, he is noticed by the plain-dressed armies, and they are pursued. They all run to a building, and Jae-sik goes to hold off the army. He warns them that the army is coming, and stalls them just long enough that Peter and Kim can run away. The pair then separate to avoid getting caught. However, one of the officers catches up with Kim. He starts beating up the man, asking for Peter's location. However, Kim doesn't betray his customer. This angers the man, who starts strangling the driver with his boots. Just then, Peter arrives and strikes the man, rendering him unconscious, and the two escape. They run back to Ryu's house, but Jae-sik does not return. That night, Kim tells Peter about his life. How when his wife was dying, she asked him to buy a taxi to look after their daughter rather than treating her further. He had agreed without arguing, because he was never a fighter. He tells Peter that he cannot fight for him, nor for the people here. So the next day, Kim decides to go back home. Ryu gives him a Gwangju taxi and also a map showing him hidden paths out of Gwangju, with which he also gives him the money from Peter. He hopes that one day their children can have a picnic together. Kim then leaves the premises of Gwangju. Kim reaches outside Gwangju and starts preparing to go back to his home. He buys his daughter some shoes and has a huge lunch. However, in the restaurant, he hears the people say that Gwangju is peaceful, and the people there are the ones that are bad and abusing the government. Having witnessed the atrocities happening in Gwangju, Kim cannot stand the lies he hears. He keeps thinking about the people back there and suddenly decides to return back. Upon returning, he realizes that the conflict had reached a severe stage, and the army had started to kill anyone and everyone, protesting or not. He goes to the hospital to see a devastated Ryu crying over Jae-suk's body. Apparently, the officer from last night had killed the boy. Peter is still determined to record everything that has happened, and Kim decides to help him. They go outside to see that there were several injured people on the street being shot by the army. Even a person showing a white flag was shot down, and no one was able to go to the streets to help the injured without the risk of being shot. The taxi drivers, along with Kim, drive their taxis to the front lines and block off the soldiers. Young Po also brings the truck, and soon the people swarm in to rescue the injured. But soon the army walks past the vehicles and starts shooting the crowd mercilessly. Peter records everything, and Ryu and the others ask him to leave so that the world can see their suffering. Kim and Peter race through the streets to reach the outskirts of the city, where a soldier post is standing. The soldiers interrogate the men, and one of them searches the taxi. He notices the camera, but for some reason, he doesn't tell it to his comrade and lets them pass. Even after escaping the city, they are still pursued by the army. But the other Gwangju drivers come to their aid and help stop the pursuing vehicles. Kim manages to keep Peter safe and reach the airport. In order to trick the armies, they book a flight to Japan a day later. But Peter also gets another ticket that leaves for Japan the same night. They put the camera reel inside one of 3 sweet boxes. Peter is very thankful to Kim for all his help. He asks Kim for his phone number so that when he returns, he can pay for the damages on the taxi. Kim, however, doesn't want it and gives him a fake name and a number of the cigarette company from the cover that is lying around in his car. Peter goes to Japan, and the whole world gets to see the atrocities being committed in Gwangju. The government of Korea is forced to remove martial law after international pressure. Several years later, Peter is once again back in Korea. He searches for his friend, but he cannot find the man, because based on the info given, he doesn't exist. Later, Peter is awarded a prize for the actions he has taken for the peace in Korea. During his speech, he reminisces about his friend Kim, who had helped him and with whom he wanted to share the prize, but he couldn't find him. Somewhere in Korea, Kim reads about Peter's award in a newspaper and is happy that his friend was able to help so many people of his country. Kim is still a driver and still helps people whenever he can, however he can. What do you think about this gripping movie? Tell us in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe. See you next time.